Ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. And I'm back here again with my co-host Trevor Kaufman. And we had, a lot of NFL playoffs happen over the last week, as well as a lot of stuff going on in the NBA, a lot of good games, especially last night for my Cleveland Cavaliers. I just want to shout out that quick win. Colin Sexton popped off. It was a great night. But, just a lot to talk about in both the NBA and the NFL. And Trevor, I wanted to kick it off by just talking about the NFL. And more specifically, I wanted to talk about the upcoming playoff games for this weekend. So now we're down to the two championship games, the AFC and NFC championship games, Trevor. And, these, I would argue, are the teams that we kind of expected to be in this situation going into the playoffs. And I think that all four of these teams have a shot to win the Super Bowl. So, Trevor, I wanted to go ahead and ask you, what are your predictions for, let's start with the NFC Championship game. What are your predictions for the Packers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
This is a fantastic matchup because, as people might remember, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers absolutely annihilated Green Bay back in, I believe it was week 4 or 5 of the regular season. So way early on in the regular season, these two teams did square off. Tampa Bay won that game 38-10. A complete domination on both sides of the football. But here's what I've seen since that game. One, Devontae Adams is back and healthy, right? He was sort of in the early part of the season, not healthy, not playing consistently. Number two, Green Bay's defense has gotten a lot better as the season's gone on. I think they have a couple of really nice young players in the secondary. They obviously have Zadarius and Preston Smith. And number three, Tampa's just been a little inconsistent all year, and they've seemed to have found their stride. They've won 6 straight football games dating back to the regular season. But I still feel like there's just a little inconsistency on both sides of the football. I think when they're on, they're really on, but they also have their moments of being really off. Their defense hasn't been as good as we hyped them up to be earlier in the season. I think that young secondary is, showing its youth a little bit. But obviously they still have an elite front seven, an elite Hall of Fame quarterback, and elite offensive weapons around him. But for me, my prediction in this game is at home, a revenge game. I'm going to go with the Green Bay Packers. And I just think Aaron Rodgers is just at a slightly higher level than what anybody can put up against him this year. He seems to have figured out every defense. I mean, he threw all over the Los Angeles Rams defense last weekend, which was the number 1 ranked defense in the NFL. I think Green Bay is one of the hottest teams in the NFL. They're playing great football on both sides of the ball. And at home, with a few fans there, I think Green Bay will win this game. I'm going to go mildly lower scoring. I'm going to go, this isn't really lower scoring. I'm going to go 27-21 Packers.
All right. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think, I like a lot of your points. I think that, Aaron Rodgers, Trevor, is just playing at a, extremely high level this year. And I personally think he's going to win MVP. I know we've talked about that in the past podcasts. But I think
he did. I'm pretty sure they announced it.
Did they actually announce it? Okay.
I saw on Green Bay's Instagram. He might have been offensive player. He won some award. I'll actually look real fast just to be sure.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I mean, he's definitely at the very least in contention if he hasn't won it already. But referencing this game, I think that, this is going to be a great game. I think these teams, it was always like, once you saw the Packers starting to roll in the regular season.
Sorry, interrupt you real quick, Ryan. He was announced by Pro Football Writers of America Most Valuable Player, Aaron Rodgers.
All right. I don't know if and I'll talk about this for a second. I don't know if that's because they announced these awards today, I believe, and they announced Kevin Stefanski winning Coach of the Year. But I think it's different from the AP.
Oh, maybe it's a different.
I think it's different from the AP. I think the AP gives out their right. I think the Associated Press gives out their awards.
I see. All right. Well, I think it's publication.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless, he definitely deserves it. But talking about this game, I think that it's going to be a battle of the greats. And, Tom Brady's come out on top year over year, obviously winning a plethora of Super Bowls. But I think Aaron Rodgers, Trevor, is going to edge this game out as well. I do agree with you. This Green Bay Packers team, as you said, their defense has stepped up. Jair Alexander is a sensational player. And he's played well, not only throughout the season, but in the playoffs as well. He's stepped up big time and allowed very few yards on any of the receivers he's been guarding in these games. And the Packers offense is just absolutely rolling. Aaron Jones, obviously a great running back. That O-line without Bakhtiari is still playing well. And then you also have Lazard, who stepped up big time. I know, yeah, I think he had a few drops, but he made up big time for a few good catches in the playoffs. And Devontae Adams obviously is, arguably the best receiver in football, or at least top three. So I think that that's too much for the Buccaneers, only because I don't trust that Buccaneers defense. Just as you said, I think you're right. That secondary is a little young, and I think that obviously Devontae Adams can't really be stopped. You can only hope to contain him, and I don't know if they have that corner to contain him. So that's kind of my concern for them. Although I do think Brady's going to get it done through the air for the most part, because not only because he has Mike Evans, but he has Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown. And Antonio Brown, I think he has a minor injury on his leg, but it looks like he's going to be a go. I know he's considered day-to-day going in, so we'll see if he's a go. But if he is, Brady having those three receivers, I mean, you'll have someone open. You'll have a matchup. Favorable matchup somewhere on the field at any given time. So I think that he'll definitely make this a close game. But I think Aaron Rodgers is playing at too high of a level. So I would agree with you. I think the Packers are going to win. And I think the final score is probably going to be, I think it's going to be actually even lower scoring than you said. I think it's going to be a score of like 20-14 is my score for the Packers over at the Buccaneers.
Very low scoring.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you said it before, Trevor. If you don't mind me saying one last thing, because you've said it, and this is in the NBA as well. You've talked about it in the NBA as well, but defense tightens up, in playoff games.
It does.
Playoff atmospheres. So I think we've seen that, just in these games so far, and I think we're going to continue
I would agree.
that with these championship games.
All right, I'm glad you referenced my point. I appreciate that greatly, Ryan. So as a nice transition into our AFC Championship game, speaking of defenses tightening up, that Buffalo defense completely shut down Baltimore in the divisional round, and Kansas City's defense really stepped up against Cleveland. So the Bills and the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes has not been cleared to play. He's still in concussion protocol. He practiced, I believe, a little bit today, or he's practiced a little bit sporadically throughout this week. So, Ryan, with some question marks around the Chiefs, can Buffalo pull off the upset? Who do you got?
The thing is, and I'm talking about this from the perspective of Mahomes is going to play, because I do expect him to play. I expect him to, if he hasn't cleared protocol, to clear protocol. I know he was limited in practice these past few days. So, assuming he clears protocol and does end up playing, I think, while the Bills have had a great year, while the Bills have made a great run and they're a great team, I think we're going to see a similar game to what we saw in the Bills Chiefs in the regular season. I think it's going to be a game that, is close in score, but I think the Chiefs offense is going to dominate the ball. I think the Chiefs offense is going to make less mistakes than the Bills. And I just ultimately think that's why they're going to win, because I think the Bills, Josh Allen's a great quarterback. He's made a lot of improvements this year in year 3. And, to be a low-end MVP candidate was just, it's a great evolution for a quarterback like Josh Allen. But nonetheless, I think and I think we can all agree, he throws more interceptions and makes more mistakes than Patrick Mahomes does. And I think that, they have less talent on the offensive end, albeit they do have a good amount of talent. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is fantastic. John Brown, Gabriel Davis has stepped up big time at the end of this year, a rookie who's played very well. But I think at the end of the day, the Chiefs offense is too much. And I think their defense has stepped up enough to slow down the Bills enough to where the Bills won't be able to stop the Chiefs as much as the Chiefs will be able to stop the Bills. And I expect the Chiefs to win the turnover battle. So that's why I think the Chiefs will win this game. Now, if Patrick Mahomes doesn't play, this all changes, obviously, and I think the Bills would be favored. But as of now, I think the Chiefs will be too much for the Bills to handle, and I'm going to go with a score of 31-27. I think it's going to be a pretty close game, but I think the Chiefs will dominate the ball and dominate the game for the most part.
I completely disagree with everything you just said.
Wow.
Okay. I didn't love what I saw from KC against Cleveland. And I know Mahomes was out, but even before that, I just felt like Cleveland kind of shot themselves in the foot, more so than Kansas City making a lot of big plays. I thought Kansas City settled for a fair amount of field goals in that game. They didn't look super in sync. As I said, they had a lot of rust from having 3 weeks off on offense. And when Mahomes went down, Chad Henne made a couple nice plays, and I thought Cleveland's defense, as we know, is just really bad. So to leave Tyreek Hill open on a 4th and inches is just bad defense.
Yeah, it was man to man.
Kansas City wasn't all that convincing to me, and I think Josh Allen has been absolutely sensational. He hasn't made a mistake in these playoffs. He hasn't turned the ball over in 2 playoff games, and he's played 2 really good defenses. I mean, Indianapolis is a very solid defense. He lit them up. And then in a game against Baltimore, obviously very low scoring, but he didn't make the big mistake. He made enough plays, had that one big touchdown to Stephon Diggs to kind of ice it.
Mm.
And to me, he's completely evolved his game. And speaking of evolution, Buffalo's defense has I don't know what happened, but I just remember that the Hail Mary play where they don't have any
Hmm.
Hail Mary technique. They try and intercept a pass and then let Hopkins catch it, to
Yeah.
holding Baltimore to 3 points. I mean, I know Lamar
Wow.
Jackson didn't play in the fourth quarter, but still, that is an incredible performance by their defense. And here's the thing: who's going to cover Stephon Diggs? I mean, Rashard Higgins was running wide open against Kansas City. Jarvis Landry was running pretty open against Kansas City. Who's gonna guard Stephon Diggs? I mean, I just think Kansas City there's some concerns there, and especially since Mahomes isn't 100% healthy, Buffalo's going to come after him, and I think Buffalo has the cover corners to at least keep this offense at bay, especially if that pass rush can get to Mahomes. So for me, I'm going to go Buffalo. I think regardless if Mahomes plays or doesn't play, Buffalo wins this
Wow.
football game.
Wow.
I trust Josh Allen. I trust Sean McDermott. I think he's going to be very prepared. I'm a little frustrated with how the Coach of the Year results came out. I'm a huge advocate for him, so I believe he will be ready for this football game on Sunday. And I'm going to go Buffalo in a middle scoring game. I'm going to go 26-24 Bills.
Wow. Well, listen, I need to just say one or two things before I move on, Trevor, if that's okay. I just want to say, I would disagree that the Chiefs, looked rusty in when they came out on the field offensively against the Browns. I think, and I don't have the exact number, but I know around the end of the first half, the Chiefs were averaging, Trevor, something like 7 or 8 yards a play. All right. So they were absolutely rolling. They had, I believe, like it was unbelievable. They wouldn't even get to third down most of the time. They would just get first downs on first or second down. They were absolutely tearing through the Browns defense, absolutely tearing through them. All right. So like I don't really think that they were, in
Fair.
my opinion, I don't think they're all that rusty. And I think that the offense is going to be just as good, if not better, against the Chiefs. I mean, or against the Bills. There's no reason not to think that they won't be better because they will have shaken off the rust and obviously got back into playing the game. So I think that offense really hasn't slowed down or missed a beat. I just think Harrison Butker missed a few kicks, missed an extra point, a field goal, and Mahomes got hurt at the beginning of the third quarter, so it kind of all spiraled from there offensively. But at the end of the day, I'm not too worried about the Chiefs. I think it's gonna be a good game, but I just think that there'll be more mistakes on the Bills side than the Chiefs side. But we'll see what happens, Trevor. That's a bold prediction, choosing the Bills over the machine that is Kansas City. So we'll see if you're right. You'll be what a prediction that would be.
To
But
your point, I do agree. Kansas City was able to move the ball, but I just for
yeah,
some reason they were settling for a lot of field goals. So for
yes,
me, it felt like, and that's not usually how they
true.
roll. They usually are able to execute and get 6 points on every drive, but it felt
Mm,
like they were kind of rolling in between the 20s, and then once they got into field goal range, they were halted a little bit. And also, we're talking about a really bad defense in Cleveland that has a lot of
true.
injuries. This Buffalo defense played their best game of the season last week against
Mm,
Baltimore, and they seem to have been, they seem to have come into their own. And I really think Buffalo is going to pose a challenge to Patrick Mahomes, who won't be 100%. I mean,
yep.
even if he plays, he's not going to be 100% healthy.
Mm,
And Kansas City's defense wasn't, it was good against Cleveland, but I felt like Cleveland beat themselves a little bit. I mean, there's going to be
yep.
the infamous play where Higgins fumbles it at the 1 yard line and it rolls out of bounds for a touchback. Even they should have called a helmet to helmet hit on Sorensen there, but
Yep.
let's say that doesn't happen, and let's just say he's out of bounds at the 1. The Browns are going to score a touchdown.
Yeah.
That's 7 points right there.
Hmm.
I mean, it just felt like, I don't know. It just felt like Cleveland shot themselves in the foot, and it did. Kansas City just didn't look overwhelmingly impressive, whereas I thought Buffalo looked very impressive
Sure.
against a better opponent.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'll say one thing about Buffalo. You're right. I remember, Trevor, before the game, we said, hey, will Buffalo's run defense step up or will the Baltimore secondary step up? And I guess, at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, this Buffalo run defense really stepped up. I mean, Lamar, he ended up getting hurt and there were a couple bad snaps, by the way. That's center, by the way, for the Ravens, a few bad snaps that really kind of, it messed with the game flow of the Ravens. It happened like at least 2 or 3 times throughout that game. There were some bad snaps over Lamar's head, and ultimately it led to him getting hurt. But This Buffalo front seven was fantastic, and they just didn't have many places to go after that. I believe they got the field
Hmm.
goal on the opening drive too, did they not? Or at least they got into field goal range. Maybe they missed the kick. Tucker
They
missed two.
missed a
He
kick.
missed two field goals. He missed two field
Yeah,
goals.
I think he missed two field goals early in the game, and
Very,
then got
very,
one right before
yeah.
halftime.
Yeah,
Maybe
okay,
it
I
was in
think
the
you're right.
second quarter. He got a field goal. So
Very unlike him to miss those
I
kicks, but
know.
uh, but
Yeah.
yeah, well, we'll see what happens this week. I know there's some great games, and
Hmm.
I kind of want the Chiefs to lose, so to stop the Chiefs
I
machine.
like I like Buffalo's story, so I'm cheering for
Yeah.
them to win the Super
All right.
Bowl. It would have been if Cleveland would have beaten Kansas City, I would have been pulling hard for Cleveland.
Mhm.
But Buffalo's the one Cinderella story left because I'm sick of seeing these other three quarterbacks in it every year.
Fair, fair, fair. But with that, Trevor, we can move on from these games, and I wanted to move on to a different topic. A topic, back to the head coaching hires, head coaching carousel in the NFL. This is still going on while the playoffs are happening. And Trevor, one of our favorite candidates, someone who we thought would be hired last year, was finally
Hmm.
hired by a team, and it was hired. Robert Saleh was hired by the New York Jets. And Trevor, I'm going to be honest, I was surprised that they did this. I didn't think that they were going to be, I don't want to use this word, but I didn't think they'd be, smart enough to hire a coach like Robert Saleh, and I
Yeah.
thought whoever got him would have had a great hire. And I mean, Trevor, I want to hear your thoughts on like, Robert Saleh getting signed or getting picked up by the Jets.
Well, I absolutely love the hire by the Jets. They finally did something right. And I
Mm,
want to give Joe Douglas, their new general manager, some credit. He's done a very good job and he's gotten them a ton of draft capital. He has a ton of cap space, even in
mm,
the 10% cap cut that's going to be happening this offseason. Ton of cap space, ton of draft picks. And now the Jets can do what they want. I mean, Robert Saleh is obviously a player motivator. He reminds me a lot of guys like Brian Flores, Ron
mm,
Rivera, and he gets guys to buy in. And I think when you have a losing franchise like the New York Jets that have been losing for years and years, they need something to buy into. They need to hear a voice that they can believe in. And I think Robert Saleh will be that voice in the locker room for those players.
mm,
And I'm curious to see what the Jets do with their roster because they have a lot of options. Are they going to
mm,
trade Sam Darnold and get even more, draft capital / cap space? Or are they going to try and get skill position players and build around Darnold? I personally think they should trade Darnold.
mm.
I don't know if they
Really?
should draft Fields. I'm back and forth on if they should draft Fields, but I really do think they should make a run to Deshaun Watson because they have the space to get him.
Mm,
And I think with Robert Saleh, Deshaun Watson would be happy to play for him. But that's a topic for another discussion. Back to the
okay.
coaching hire. I'm getting a little off topic. I love the
That's
coaching
okay.
hire. I love Robert Saleh, and I think the Jets are actually heading in the right direction, as crazy as that might sound.
Yeah, so for me, I love, you made some good points. I like the coaching hire. I really like the coaching hire. We've both talked about Salah and we've, complimented him. We think he
Mm-hmm.
was a, really good D coordinator. I think he'll be a great head coach, or I think he can be a great head coach. Now, will he be a great one in New York? I don't know. Only because I'm nervous about him going to such a defunct organization, such chaos, I would argue, over the last few years, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
just such a losing culture. I worry that maybe he won't be able to turn it around. But I guess if anyone can, it'd be someone like him, because Robert Saleh, what he does on his defense, Trevor, is he instills, character. He instills hard work. He instills, a positive culture with the team, and that's something that the Jets need. That's something every team needs, and that's something that a head coach needs to do. That's why Mike Tomlin is praised
Mm-hmm.
to be such a great head coach. That's why Kevin Stefanski was able to turn around the culture in Cleveland. That's why a lot of these coaches, Trevor, are so good because they're able to connect with the players and turn the culture around in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Salah can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, good hire by the Jets, but I hope that they don't. I hope they don't mess this up. I hope they let Salah have pretty free reign and allow him to turn the culture around and allow him to make personnel decisions, for players that maybe aren't really buying into his team chemistry or his, character building mantra. So I hope
Mm-hmm.
that this all works out. And I think it was a good hire overall.
I will say to your point, I actually
Mm.
like the Jets organization has cleaned up a little bit.
Okay.
They got rid of their old general manager. I forgot his name. They brought in Joe Douglas last year in June of 2019. They
Mm.
gave him a 6-year contract, so they clearly have a lot of faith in this guy.
Mm.
And from what I've seen, he's done a very good job. He tanked this season because he knew even with Jamal Adams and a couple other of overpaid players, you're not going to win a lot of games.
Yep.
And he basically said, "Let's start over and let's just completely rebuild this entire franchise from ground zero." And he's done a great job doing it so far. They got rid of Adam Gase. They made a good trade for Jamal Adams where they get a ton of draft capital. They have a ton of cap space. Now, now it's go fishing. Let's see who you can
Mm.
get in the offseason. Let's see who you can get in the draft. And let's see what you'll do at the quarterback situation. So I actually think the Jets are heading in the right direction. And I think bringing in a guy like Robert Salah will also be more attractive to free agents because I do think players would
True.
love to play for him. And obviously, there's only been good things said about him in San Francisco,
Mm.
and you can just see it. The guy is a ball of energy. I mean, he is super passionate about the game of football. He loves football, and I think his energy will roll off onto his players. I think this is
Yeah.
a 100% can't lose hire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we both agree that, he could be a really good head coach. He has a lot of potential to be a really good head coach. We'll just see if it actually works out. But I agree, definitely good hire, and they're definitely headed in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Trevor, I wanted to move on to one more topic in the NFL, if that's okay.
Do it. Yeah,
And this
absolutely.
is, this is something that's developed over the last week or so, last 10 days or so. And it's Deshaun Watson being pretty unhappy with the Houston Texans organization, and deservedly so, and rightfully so, right? I mean, Trevor, this team, this
Mm-hmm.
organization has not done him right. I mean, to be fair, they've been fairly consistent since he's been there. And even before he's been there, the Texans have always been a pretty good team, Trevor. They've always been a contender. They've had a few down years, but they had, the Andre Johnson days, the Arian Foster days, the Matt Schaub days
Mm-hmm.
when they made the playoffs, and then they made the playoffs with Deshaun Watson as well. So, they've had success, pretty consistently over the last maybe 10 or 15 years. But now with Bill O'Brien, making that DeAndre Hopkins trade, that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back there, kind of for Deshaun Watson. And Bill O'Brien gets fired, and now they're just left to the Texans organization is just left to pick up the
Mm-hmm.
pieces. So it's really unfortunate what happened to this team, but nonetheless, Deshaun Watson is not happy. He wants help. He wants a competent coach. I think that he wants a competent front office, and I don't know if he thinks he has either. So if Deshaun isn't pleased, Trevor, and he leaves or he requests a trade, where could he go? What would be a good fit? What team would most want him, or what would he fit best with?
I got two options, and there's obviously plenty of teams that Deshaun Watson could go to,
Mm,
and it would be a good fit because Deshaun Watson's a Pro Bowl quarterback,
of course.
and he would make any team he goes to better.
Mm,
But I think he wants to win now. So I'm thinking he wants to go to a team that can win a Super Bowl with him on the roster.
mm,
And two teams that come to mind are the Pittsburgh Steelers and the San Francisco 49ers.
mm.
The San Francisco 49ers for obvious reasons, both teams for obvious reasons, but for
Yeah.
San Francisco, an elite head coach in Kyle Shanahan, who's just an elite offensive mind,
Mm-hmm.
and an elite defense when they're healthy. And their weapons are good, right? I think Brandon Ayuk was a nice hit in the draft. Deebo Samuel's been okay when he plays, and George Kittle's obviously an elite tight end. So he has weapons, and he also has, an amazing play designer that can, make 12-year-old kids look like NFL stars. So I think San Francisco is a Super Bowl contender with Deshaun Watson. And
Mm.
for obvious reasons, Pittsburgh is also a Super Bowl contender with Deshaun Watson. Not only does Pittsburgh have an elite defense as well, but they have really, really good young receivers. I mean, Juju, we'll see if he stays in the offseason, but then you go to guys like Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson. I know Deontay Johnson has had a lot of drops. I get it, but I still think Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool are two terrific young receivers. I think Juju is still a very solid receiver despite, his TikTok dancing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think with Deshaun Watson on either of those rosters, those teams become Super Bowl contenders. And obviously, the cap is going to be a bit of an issue. But I look at Pittsburgh. Ben Roethlisberger is currently under a 2-year, $68 million deal. I mean, that's a lot of money you're pushing off to the side. You look at the San Francisco 49ers and Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't know the exact number on the contract, but I believe it's
It
somewhere
was
in the
around.
ballpark of
Well,
5-year, $138 million contract or
I
something
think it
like
was around like
that.
115. Yeah, it was like 110.
115,
That's
118,
still a lot
something
of
like
money.
that.
Yeah.
Some absurd amount of money.
Yeah.
So that's two guys where, you get rid of them, you bring in Deshaun Watson. I don't know how much more expensive or cheap it would be. I don't know the exact numbers.
Mm.
But I think right there, either of those two teams can win a Super Bowl with Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, no, you definitely make a good point, and I agree with both those teams. I was actually going to highlight the 49ers because I do think that that's probably the best destination for Deshaun Watson, in my opinion. I think that they have a guy with Super Bowl experience, with playoff experience,
Hmm.
Kyle Shanahan as head coach. They have a guy, or they have a defense, I should say, that also has experience, in the playoffs, and they've proven that they can be an elite defense. They had a lot of
Hmm.
injuries this year. They had an off year, a ton of injuries, but you're right, that offense has weapons. The O line is nothing to be embarrassed about. And they have George
Hmm.
Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, a bunch of weapons on that offense, along with Raheem Mostert and a few other running backs like Jeff Wilson Jr. And Jerick McKinnon, who aren't so bad themselves, in a committee. So that team definitely has a lot of talent, and they're well coached and disciplined. So I do agree with you.
Hmm.
I think that could be a really good fit, and I wanted to point that fit out, and you did that well. But I also wanted to point out Miami because a lot of people are talking about the Miami Dolphins, and Deshaun Watson could go there. And I just want to address these because I think he could fit well with Miami. I think that,
He would. I think
I
he
think
would.
Brian Flores is a good coach. I think Deshaun respects him, and I think the league respects him, and I think the players respect him. And he's done a good job turning the team around. And I think their defense is fantastic. It stepped up big time this year, and it's proved to be I'd say top 10 or top 8 defense. This defense was really solid for most of this year, at a few off
Hmm.
games, but its secondary and overall the entire defense was just really solid. And I think that'll help Deshaun. It's something he wants, and it has some weapons. They got Mike Gesicki, Devontae Parker, Miles Gaskin, just a decent running back, and they have a lot of.
Weapons, maybe really old 19th century weapons that don't really work
Oh,
anymore. But
wow,
yeah, sure, weapons.
listen, these are young players who.
Jakeem Grant, yeah, he's elite.
Okay,
Would name another receiver. Name a receiver outside of Devontae Parker. You can't. Albert
I,
Wilson, is he still on the team? Preston
I, I mean,
Williams.
I don't think
Miami does
that's
not have
I don't
weapons.
think that's really the
I
point.
disagree with
I don't
that.
think that's really the point though, because they also have the third pick in the
Yes.
draft, who they can
No,
take, the
you're
Heisman
right.
Trophy winner in Devontae Smith. They could take Jamar Chase. They have, I believe, an solid amount of cap space. So they could also sign
I
a
do.
receiver. And I think they have a competent front office and coach, which is what Deshaun's looking for. So I think that could work. But I'm not really a fan on them giving up on Tua so early because they presumably trade Tua to the Texans in that deal. I'm not really a
Hmm.
fan of them doing that. I think that they are going to stick with them, but it definitely is an option, and Deshaun could play in either place.
I don't hate the Miami option. I just don't think it's the perfect fit because I feel like
Yeah, I would agree.
Miami's kind of giving up on what was supposed to be their guy after half a season.
Mhm.
And I was very high on Tua. I was a little disappointed in how he played this year. It's obvious he was not that good, but he wasn't bad either. He took
Yeah.
care of the ball. And who's he throwing the ball to? Ryan mentioned their weapons. I mean, they don't have weapons. Jasicki's okay. Devontae Parker is okay. And then outside of that, there's nothing. And the offensive line is still
Mhm.
rebuilding.
Mhm.
So there's still the option they take Sewell from Oregon in the draft at number 3. So for me, it just feels like Miami's kind of in a different direction. I feel like Watson needs to go to a team that can win tomorrow, whereas I still think Miami's trying to build up their roster a little bit more. Now, I will say Miami's defense is close to elite, if not elite. They have a very, very good defense. So I think bringing in Watson would help. But I agree with you, Ryan. I just think it's a little foolish to give up on Tua after half a
Yep.
season with awful weapons.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think that, I mean, in my opinion, the 49ers are the best fit for Deshaun Watson right now. But, that's just my opinion. But Trevor, I think, we'll see what happens with Deshaun. I know there's a lot of, rumors swirling around, but we'll see what happens. And I think, Trevor, with that, we were
Mm-hmm.
going to move on to the other sport, the sport that's, been continuing the regular season, the NBA. And, I think there's been some surprises this year, Trevor. I really do. I think there have been
Absolutely.
surprisingly bad teams and surprisingly good teams. And for me, I was actually going to focus on, some more surprisingly bad teams this year. And I was
Mm-hmm.
going to start off by talking about the Houston Rockets, Trevor, because this team, I know they traded James Harden, and I'm not going to get back into that whole kind of fiasco or debate. But even with James Harden, they really weren't winning. And they've continued to their losing streak. They lost to the Bulls recently. I know they lost just last night to the Phoenix Suns to continue their losing streak. And they're just not, I don't know, they're just not winning. And so I guess someone in the West, Trevor, had to miss the playoffs, right? Because, there were so many
Mm-hmm.
quality teams. And it looks like Houston's going to be one of those teams unless they turn it around quickly. I mean, I will say I really, really loved the Christian Wood signing at the time of the signing, and I love it even more now. He's playing
I do
so
too.
well this year. He's an absolute animal of a player. I'm just looking at the Houston Chicago game, and he had 30 points. 3 for 5 from three, 9 boards. This guy is an absolute beast on the offensive end. And he was, their best player. And if you look at Bucs plus minus in that game, and I think for most of these games, he's going to be their best player because they don't have all that much talent, Trevor. I think that Victor was good. He's actually very good, but he's not what he was before his leg injury, where I think that he's just kind of lost half a step. And it's kind of sad to see, but he's still a very talented player. He's just not quite as good as he was. And I just don't really think that it's going to be enough to push the Rockets into the playoffs. I think that, DeMarcus Cousins has really disappointed me. I mean, looking at his season, he was coming off the bench playing 15 or 20 minutes a game, really not doing much on the floor. Against Chicago, Trevor, he had 0 for 7 from the floor for 2 points. I mean, this guy, I get there's more to the game than just, shooting the ball, but when you're 0 for 7, my goodness gracious. So that was disappointing, and it's kind of been a trend the whole season. And maybe when they get John Wall back, maybe we'll see some Oladipo, John Wall, Eric Gordon, Christian Wood action, some sort of, cohesiveness there. But right now I'm just not seeing it. And I'm kind of disappointed in this team. I kind of think that they have the talent to make a low-end playoff run. And I don't know if they're going to be able to if they continue to play like this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I actually really, with John Wall, and again, he didn't play last night, which is partially the reason why they lost. But with John Wall in the lineup, I do like their starting five. I mean, John Wall, Victor Oladipo, Eric Gordon, PJ Tucker, and as you mentioned, Christian Wood, who's been a stud this year. He had a double-double last night as well. So, yeah, I agree with you on Houston. But when you do trade a superstar like James Harden, you're not making a win-now type move.
That's true.
But so we'll see what they do with their draft picks. To me, it seems like they're in like a half rebuild right now. But when you bring in guys like John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins, it's kind of like, are you rebuilding or not? Even though DeMarcus Cousins is just a complete shell of himself. He can't get off the ground anymore. Even though he lost a bunch of weight in the offseason, apparently. He can't jump. And John Wall can't seem to stay on the floor consistently. I don't know if he was hurt last night. He must have been hurt because he didn't have COVID because he was sitting – or he had a sore left knee, I believe is what it was.
Yes, he did.
So – for me, I think Houston needs to blow it up and keep Christian Wood and go from there. I just think it didn't work. This trade is a good trade. You have a lot of draft picks now, but I think getting rid of guys like John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins and really expensive overpaid players is what Houston needs to do. And really build around, try and just rebuild this roster around Christian Wood, maybe Victor Oladipo, maybe Eric Gordon. Not a huge fan of both of them long term, but Houston has been a little bit of a disappointment. But moving on to my team, and I'll talk about a team that has also been disappointing this year.
Yeah.
I think it points to a larger point in the NBA as well, is the New Orleans Pelicans. I mean, they're 5-8. They made all these great trades, to get a ton of draft picks and a ton of cap space and, build for the future. But if you're always constantly building for the future, you're never going to win in the present. And that's my fear with Oklahoma City. Obviously, we'll see what they do with 17 draft picks or whatever they have. But I think, Zion's been pretty good this year. Statistically, he's been good. I haven't paid attention to a lot of their games. But outside of him, I mean, Lonzo Ball's a bust. Jackson Hayes hasn't done anything. I mean, Jackson Hayes really hasn't done anything for me. And, Brandon Ingram's been great. So if I'm New Orleans, I look at their game last night against Utah. Zion goes for 32 points. Brandon Ingram goes for 17. No one else goes for more than 9. I mean, Eric Bledsoe's been terrible for them this year. Steven Adams is Steven Adams. He's okay. Lonzo Ball's been terrible. Jackson Hayes, as I mentioned, hasn't done anything for this franchise. Josh Hart really hasn't done much. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, he's been okay, but hasn't really done much.
Yeah.
So all these, trade for the future, let's get these draft picks, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, they still have a lot of picks because Anthony Davis was expensive. So we'll see. Maybe they're good in a couple years. But I think outside of Zion and Brandon Ingram, excuse me, I apologize for that. Outside of Zion and Brandon Ingram, this team is horrible. And it's showing. They're 5-8. They're not a very good defensive team. And I think they've been a bit of a disappointment because I had them as a borderline playoff team. Actually, I didn't have them in my top 8, but I had them as a borderline 9 or 10.
Okay.
So in the competitive West, it's hard. But
Yeah, it
yeah, I'm a
is.
little disappointed in this team right now.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I'll make this brief, but I definitely agree with you. I mean, Zion's been pretty much really their own. I mean, him and Brandon Ingram have carried this team offensively, Trevor. I mean, you see it in the box score
Mm-hmm.
night after night, and they're doing it relatively efficiently as well. I mean, you look at Zion 14 for 19 from the floor. I mean, that's efficient. Brandon Ingram had sort of an off night, 8 for 18, but that's just below 50%, and that's not anything to be scoff at. That's not that bad.
No, it's not.
And I think Trevor, it comes down to just a lack of depth. You're totally right. I mean, you look at these players. And they're playing Eric Bledsoe 25 minutes, and he's a minus 19 on the floor. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're not contributing on either end. You need someone to contribute on at least one end of the floor. Lonzo Ball was horrible offensively in their last game against the Jazz, and he's been pretty bad offensively his whole career. But at least
Mm-hmm.
he was a positive on the defensive end. I mean, that at least that's his saving grace, right? But this team on
Mm-hmm.
the bench, Trevor. I mean, JJ Redick, really not shooting the ball all that well. Jackson Hayes, you're right. I am disappointed in what I've seen from him. Not done much this year. He played 15 minutes and had one rebound. You're a center, a young center, and you get one rebound in 15 minutes. I don't know how
Right.
you do that. So just like small things like that. I mean, this team, they're not getting blocks. They're turning the ball over, and it's just been disappointing to see. So they need another piece. You're right. Hopefully they hit in the draft, but they've definitely disappointed me this year just because outside of their two young stars, I don't really see much else there.
100%. I completely agree. And we'll see
Yeah.
how they hit in the draft. But Ryan, to change tune a little bit,
Yep.
if you have a team you want to talk about that's over or exceeded your expectations.
A team that's exceeded my expectations. Honestly, I actually had two teams that underachieved,
Oh, I'm
but
sorry. Yeah, you're right. You
if
do have two
if
teams
that's
that did not
okay,
meet your
yeah,
Go
it's
ahead. My
okay.
bad.
But
I have a team that exceeded your expectations.
I kind of wanted to focus on the underachieving teams because as we said, there've been quite a few this year, Trevor, and I wanted to talk about the Toronto Raptors, and I know we've talked about them a little bit before, but I wanted to reference them again because what's happened to this team, Trevor? I mean, this team isn't all that different from the team that, made it, far in the playoffs, that gave the Celtics all they could handle. The team, they're really not that different from that Kawhi championship team, obviously minus Kawhi. But,
So yeah,
they,
that's a somewhat of a big
my point is
difference.
they played very well in the regular, they played very well in the regular season last year. And they're just not doing it this year. I mean, they lost to Miami yesterday without Jimmy
Mm-hmm.
Butler, I might add. And the Raptors, they're just not good. They're 5-9 right now. Pascal Siakam seems to just not be the same, up and coming superstar that we thought he was going to be ever since the
Mm-hmm.
bubble. He's kind of found it a little bit. He's passing the ball more. He had a triple double a few like last week, and he's shooting a little bit better. But still, he's not the player that they need him to be. And Kyle Lowry is struggling. He's struggling at least on the offensive end. Trevor. I mean, in the Miami game, he was 1 for 10 from three, 2 for 12 from the field. Fred VanVleet, he's been his usual good self, but outside of those three players, they don't really have much, Trevor. I mean, OG Anunoby's okay. He's contributed on both ends a little bit, but you have Aaron Baines as your starting center, and then you have Chris Boucher, and then Terrence Davis and Norman Powell, guys who are normally good bench players, but for some reason they're just not getting it done, especially on the defensive end. I mean, these guys are very negative, especially Boucher and Powell on the defensive end, at least in the last few games. And I don't know, Trevor. There's just not winning games. They're not closing out games well. They choked a lead against the 76ers a few weeks back where they were winning the whole game and just choked the game away and lost the game. And I feel like, I'm starting to get a little bit worried. I think this team's talented, but I don't know. I mean, are they going to turn around? I mean, Nick Nurse is a great coach. I sure hope so. So, I'm looking to see this week and the next 2 weeks, Trevor, will they step up and turn it around? And if they don't, I'm going to be very worried about them potentially maybe even missing the playoffs and just totally underperforming this year.
I actually have a lot to say about Toronto, so I'm glad you brought them up.
Yeah.
First point I'd like to make, this Toronto team reminds me, these like Toronto past 2 or 3 seasons remind me
Hmm.
exactly the same as the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. 2011, the Dallas Mavericks, you know, they're built very similarly, right? They kind of have their one superstar in Dirk Nowitzki, Kawhi Leonard. They win a championship when they weren't really, expected to. Dallas upsets Miami in LeBron's first year. The Raptors beat Golden State, but they probably wouldn't have beaten Golden State if they were fully healthy, and they weren't expected to beat Milwaukee. So both kind of underdog champions. And then they kind of didn't, do anything. They kind of just let the players grow older. And I think that's what
Mm,
happened. Dallas hasn't been to a final since. Nowitzki got old, Jason Terry got old,
yeah,
Sean Marion, other guys like that got old.
yeah.
And same thing with Toronto. Kyle Lowry's getting older. Pascal Siakam has obviously been a little bit worse of a player. And it just feels like Toronto stayed stagnant. And I mentioned this on the podcast a few weeks ago. Toronto they're the same. They haven't gotten better, and the rest of the Eastern Conference has gotten better, in my opinion, and it's
Mm,
showing. Now, what I will say is I will defend them a little bit. I still think they're going to make the playoffs.
same.
And I'm going through their losses right now. 7-point loss to Philadelphia. As you mentioned, they
Yep.
choked the lead.
Yes, they did.
4-point loss to New Orleans. 1-point loss to Golden State. 1-point loss to Portland.
Yeah, but
9-point loss to Miami. They're
mhm.
losing a lot of close games.
Yep.
And the majority of their games that they've played this year have been close. And, most of their losses, as I mentioned, have been close losses. So I think their fortune is going to change a little bit. I think they're going to start winning some more of these close games,
Mm,
especially since they are an experienced veteran basketball team.
yeah.
But as I mentioned, they haven't gotten better. They haven't done anything in the offseason. Van Vliet's, developed nicely, but they haven't built this bench after losing Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard. Siakam is a great number 2, but you can't win. I think he's a great number 2, but you'll never win a championship with him as your number 1. And
Yeah.
that shows. Kawhi Leonard was the number 1. He was the number 2. They both flourished. They both won a title.
Yep.
So I just think Toronto needs to. It's an expensive roster. I don't know how they're going to manage it because I do think Siakam is still young and a very good player.
Hmm.
But I think some of these older guys like Kyle Lowry and so on, you need to start considering moving them.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And especially with Lowry, because he is aging. I believe he's like 33 now. He's somewhere around there in his mid 30s. So he's definitely not on the right side of 30 anymore. But Trevor, I know you had one more team to talk about before we conclude this podcast. I know it was a team, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a team that you've been impressed with so far in this NBA season.
I've been on fire on this podcast. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to get both these NFC Championship games right. I've been right about Toronto all along,
Okay.
and I'm going to be right again about Utah. In
Okay.
my Western Conference standings before the season, I had Utah. I believe I had Utah finishing 4th in my Western Conference standings, and people
Hmm.
are like, Utah's not that good. Donovan Mitchell. Outside of that, who do they got? Utah is an example of a great regular season team. They're
That's
well
true.
coached. They're well disciplined, and they know who they are, and they know who they're not, right?
Yep.
And they flourish in the regular season. They win a lot of games because they're a playoff team, and they play really hard every night. And I think Donovan Mitchell is a very selfless Jimmy Butler type leader, where he obviously needs the ball more than Jimmy Butler, but I think guys really enjoy playing with him, and I think people respect him, even though he's a bit of a younger guy in the locker room. And for me, Utah's just a great regular season team who's well coached, and they're
Yep.
doing it again. They're winning a lot of games. They're 10-4, I believe. They're 3rd in the Western Conference.
Yep.
So we'll see where they finish at the end of the season. I believe my Western Conference standings are, and I'll say them right now on the podcast just so that people don't be like, Trevor, blah, blah, blah. You're saying this after they started winning. At the beginning of the season, I had Lakers 1, Clippers 2, Denver 3, Utah 4, Portland 5, Phoenix 6, and then I believe it was Dallas 7, Golden State 8. I believe those are my standings at the beginning of the season. So we'll
Okay.
see where that finishes at the end of the year. But right now, that's looking pretty good if all things considered. So I was right about Utah at the beginning of the season, and I'm going to brag about them right now because they're playing great and they're winning a lot of games. And people shouldn't necessarily be surprised because this is a typical Utah team. Great regular season, first or second round playoff exit.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I mean, I think with the evolution of Donovan Mitchell and these younger players, like, I mean, more experience. I don't know, maybe that changes things, but you are right. They definitely they definitely exit the playoffs in the first or second round. And to be fair though, it's hard going up against the LA teams. These teams are so
Absolutely.
stacked.
Absolutely.
It's really hard to overcome that. But I mean, they're playing very well at Utah, and I think that you're right. They have an identity. They're a pesky defensive team who has a really good anchor in the paint. And, they are a solid offensive team who hits enough threes. I mean, in their game against the Pelicans, they shot 45% from three. So, they hit a lot of threes in an efficient rate. Donovan Mitchell shot the three ball well. Bogdanovich is a very good shooter. Joe Ingles, obviously, also a very good three-point shooter. And Royce O'Neal has also kind of stepped up this year. I know he only had 6 points in the Pelicans game, but he stepped up this year. He's made quite a few shots, especially from three, throughout the season. And he's also a very good wing defender for that team. So I like this team overall. I kind of expected them to be this good. I mean, they just got out to a faster start than the other teams, I think. I think it'll all balance out. I like Jordan Clarkson off the bench as a scorer to, supplement Mitchell being on the bench. And yeah, I mean, I like this team overall. I mean, you've got some good depth. Derek Favors is a good backup center to have. George Niang is a solid forward to have, good three-point shooter. They have decent depth. And Mike Conley, don't forget about Mike Conley. He's struggled the last year and a half shooting the ball, but he's still a very good passer, still a decent defender. He was a plus 26 in the box plus minus against the Pelicans, even while being 2 for 7 from the field. So, he's a great defender and a great passer of the basketball. So, Mitchell doesn't have to handle the ball as much as he previously had to. So I think this team is good. I think this team will sustain this level of play, and I expect them to be a top 5 seed at worst. I think they'll be a 4 or a 5 seed if I had to guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if they snuck in at the 3. Not at all.
I agree with a lot of what you just said there, which is kind of a rarity, Ryan. You're usually pretty wrong about these things, but this time I think you got it spot on.
Well, I appreciate that. But, listen, I think, Trevor, I mean, unless you have anything else to add, I think that that just about wraps up the NBA and just about wraps up the podcast, unless you have any final words, any shout outs, anything you want to say.
No shout out. Actually, one shout out. Shout out Cole Anthony last night hitting a buzzer beater.
Yes,
3
great
to beat
shot.
The Timberwolves. Great shot. He's actually done pretty well. And, Ryan and I both had him, labeled as somewhat of a bust. He wasn't great in college.
He was not.
His draft stock did fall, but he seems to have been playing pretty good for Orlando. And he had a great shot last night. So shout out Cole Anthony. We'll give him a little bit of love on the podcast. I'm sure he'll never see this, but that's okay.
And you never know, Cole Anthony, if you're seeing this, great shot. It really was a really nice shot. So shout out to him. But I don't have anyone else to shout out before this podcast ends other than Colin Sexton. Finally, NBA
fair enough.
He finally got some respect, on the national level, and I hope he continues to get some because he's a great player and he's getting better year over year. So Trevor,
I will say, Ryan, I'll show you a little bit of love, and the Cavaliers have surprised me a little bit.
Thank you.
I really thought their hot start was kind of a fluke.
No.
They've slowed down a little bit, but they might have a shot at the 8 seed. We'll see. Toronto and Miami are going to play better throughout the season, so we'll see. But they might finish 9 or 10 and get into that play-in game. So good for the Cavs and good for JB Bickerstaff. He's done a great job.
And we'll see. But that just about does it. And we'll be back next week with another podcast. So we'll see you there.